SR 845 POWERLINE Road in Lauderdale Manors, Florida. Here's our case study shown in red. Looking at this from an aerial photograph, we see a very dense roadway network surrounded by large areas of urbanization. I can't see a whole lot from the aerial photograph about what the land use pattern is necessarily, other than that there's a lot of land use. Something's going on to quite an extent there. I don't see large areas of rural land around this, so I'm probably not looking at rural or rural town. I'm looking at something C3, C4, C5, something higher up the scale like that. So let's take a look a little closer and see what we have. If we look at the primary measures for land use, we can see that our land use map is mostly one color. It's a lot of light yellow and darker yellow, which is single-family residential and multifamily residential. There's a little bit of institutional there, but essentially I'm looking at mostly a residential kind of monoculture condition here. Let's see what building height and placement and parking tells us about this area. The building height is 1 to 2 floors. We have detached buildings for the most part with small to medium setbacks. There are some buildings that are right up to the street. You can see one there. We do have some fronting uses, and parking is mostly in the front and occasionally on the side when we looked at how the parking was being handled there. Let's look at our roadway connectivity. Our intersection density is 247 intersections per square mile. The block perimeter is 2,300 feet, and our block length on average is 480 feet. So dropping all that into our context classification matrix and looking at the distinguishing characteristics here, we have a mix of uses set within small blocks with a well-connected roadway network. May extend long distances. The roadway network usually connects to residential neighborhoods immediately along the corridor or behind the uses fronting the roadway. And so when we look at the preponderance of all the different types of things this could be, we know it's not a rural town, so we can take that out of the picture. Why wouldn't this be a suburban condition? Well, when we looked at just the mix of land uses, it was a suburban-looking set of land uses. However, when we looked at the roadway connectivity network and we looked at the location of the buildings and how the buildings are related to the street, we began to see that this was looking less suburban and more general urban. So our primary measures are steering us toward a C4 general urban condition for this roadway. Maybe we're not sure about that. We could always go and look at the secondary measures as well. So there's our general urban. So for our secondary measures, let's see how it shakes out. The allowed residential density is 15 dwelling units to the acre. The allowed office and retail density is 1.0 floor area ratio. Population density is 12.3 persons per acre. Existing employment density, 2.3 jobs per acre. Now that's one doesn't get us up high enough to be an urban general, but it is more urban. So our secondary measures as well are kind of pointing us toward general urban. You see it does not meet the requirements for C3, and we know that it's not a rural town, and we know that it's not an urban center. We could tell by the other measurements that it was not looking at a C5 condition. US 27, Monroe Street in Tallahassee, Florida. Our case study limits are shown in the red line here along Highway 27 in Tallahassee. Looking at this from the aerial photograph to kind of get our bearings, we can see that there's a fairly dense location along our study area corridor. The surrounding area is urban as far as we can see. There's not really any rural land out there in this photograph, so we are in a city of some kind, and it looks like we're looking at an urbanized portion of the city. As you look in the enlarged inset there, you can see, yes, there's quite a bit of urban development in this location. So we're probably looking at something C4 or higher in these kind of conditions. So let's take a closer look and see. Our land uses show a wide mix and range of land uses. There's not much single family, but there is some multifamily, quite a bit of commercial and retail and institutional and government uses here in this area. Let's look at our building height and placement. Building height is 1 to 5 stories with some taller buildings. This is our study roadway is Monroe Street, which is going down the center of the photograph here on the right. The building placement, these are mostly attached buildings with no front or side setbacks. Are they fronting uses? Yes, they are. You can see the buildings go right up to the back of the sidewalk in this photograph. What about the parking? Where's the parking located? The parking is located to the rear of the buildings, or it's located to the side. In some situations, it's located in parking garages. So the parking is all telling us that it looks like an urban condition. It's not located between the building and the street. So let's look at our roadway connectivity. We have 180 intersections per square mile. If you like to measure block perimeter, our average block perimeter is 1,770 feet. If you like to go with block length, our block length here is an average of 380 feet. So these are very short urban type blocks. When we drop all this into our context classification matrix, we can see, looking at the distinguishing characteristics, this is shaken out to be a C5 urban center. You can also look and say, well, why wouldn't it be C4 urban general? You see there's a lot of overlap there between urban general and urban center. And the area where they're mostly different is under the land use type. You see a lot more mixing of land uses in this urban condition. Also, if you look at the building height, because we do have higher buildings there, general urban, you typically don't have, you have 1 to 2, maybe 3-story buildings, but you don't typically have your largest buildings in the area. In this condition, we have buildings that are over 5 stories tall. So this is steering us toward a C5 urban condition. And in fact, this is downtown Tallahassee, so it is indeed the urban center there. And we don't have too much trouble arriving that this is a C5 condition for this roadway. If we wanted to, we can look at our secondary measures to see what would be happening in this area. This is how they would look for a C5 condition. We have actually quite a bit of residential density allowed, 150 persons per acre. The floor area ratio is 8 in this condition, which again is steering us back toward a more urban condition. The existing population density, 2.4 persons per acre. The existing employment density, 90 jobs per acre. So that's putting us well into the urban condition. So again, looking at the distinguishing characteristics and seeing how the secondary measures play out, we're seeing that this could be C5 or C6, and we know it's not C6 because it's not an area of 1 million population or more. We know it's not a C2T rural town because we established that there's no rural areas around it, so the only thing that's left for us to have here is our C5 urban center condition. SR 527 Orange Avenue in Orlando, Florida. You can see the case study corridor is shown here in the red line. Looking at an aerial photograph of this area to kind of get our bearings to start with, I don't see rural land around it, so I'm looking at either a suburban or more urban condition than that. Just eyeballing it from the aerial, I see a lot of connected roadway network. This is making me think it's going to be more urban versus suburban. And zooming in more closely, I can already tell from the aerial photograph that I've got a lot of density and intensity here along this corridor. Our corridor is the red line that's shown in the inset, the vertical red line there. So I can see that I have a lot of intensity along this corridor. Also, looking at my land use map, it's very colorful, which means that there is a lot of things going on here in terms of mixing of land uses. I've got some institutional, government, retail, commercial. I don't have any multifamily directly on this corridor, but there is some nearby. But primarily along my corridor, I've got a mix of uses there. So I look at building height and placement. Most of my buildings are over 4 stories tall. There are some shorter ones, but basically I'm in excess of 4 stories. My building placements are mostly attached buildings. There's no front or side setbacks in this corridor. I do have fronting uses. I don't have a sidewalk, or I'm sorry, I don't have a parking lot in the front. I do have buildings that front directly onto the street. When I look at where my parking is located, this is our study corridor in the center of the diagram here, and you see the parking is all located behind the buildings. Looking at our roadway connectivity measures, we have an intersection density of 220 intersections per square mile, a block perimeter of 1,910 feet, and an average block length of 450 feet. Dropping all that into the matrix, I know it's not a rural town, so I can just ignore that. I can see that while my mix of uses starts to look kind of suburban commercial, nothing else really fits a suburban commercial, so I know I'm not in suburban commercial. I can see that my roadway connectivity could put me into C4, general urban, but when I look at the distinguishing characteristics in the building placement and building height, I'm way higher than C4. That puts me down into C5 and C6 conditions. And most of the measurements that we looked at could fit into either C5 or C6 conditions. The kicker here is going to be that I know that this area is located in an urban core that has more than 1 million population, and so that's going to be my C6 urban core condition. Anywhere else in Florida, this might be their C5. In Orlando, because it is a city of 1 million or more, we know that this is going to be a C6 urban core. This is an area of regional significance here. So that's going to put us into C6 for the primary measures. If I wanted to look at the secondary measures for this, my allowed residential density is quite high, up to 200 dwelling units per acre. The allowed residential retail density and office density is floor area ratio of 3. The existing population density is 8.5 persons per acre. My existing employment density is 170 jobs per acre. So again, I'm pretty squarely into the C6 category here under these secondary uses as well.